Alright, another quick one. I've got to leave the house soon. How do you make one object appear in front of another? This seems like it should have a really simple solution, but I remember having this issue a couple of months ago and not being able to find a really good answer, so I ended up making it myself in geometry notes. The simple idea is you have a camera and you have an object. If you know the position of these two, then you can scale the object as this gets smaller and smaller towards the camera. And even though it's getting closer and closer, in the camera's view, it looks like it's the same size because it's the same angle from the view of the camera. If that didn't make any sense, hopefully it will as we go on. Alright, here's a little test scene that I've got of a cube inside of a cube. You'll see that it's always in front of the middle cube, even though it looks like it's in the center. If we turn off the geometry nodes, then it is actually in the center. And a neat little thing, since it's outside of the object, you actually get proper lighting. But just make sure to use quite diffuse lighting, like area lights, because you can get shadows from this object onto that one, and that can look a bit confusing as to why is this thing that's in the middle causing a shadow on thing that's on the outside. Anyway, so let's open geometry nodes, and let's have a look. It's this simple. All we're doing is we have the location of the camera, and then we're subtracting the position of each vertex, which if you haven't done vector maths before, all that does is gives us the vector from the vertex to the camera position. Incredibly useful for what we're doing. Okay then, so let's just plug this vector into the offset of a set position node. But now it disappears. What's going on here? Well, this is exactly what you'd expect to happen. You have the vertex, and we're adding on the vector to the camera position. So we're moving it to the camera position, so all of the vertices in this cube have been moved onto this single point. That's why we can't see it anymore. So we need to somehow get it somewhere in between, and we can do that by just scaling this vector, so basically making it not as long, where 0 is where it was before, and then 1 is all the way in the position of the camera. And you're seeing it's getting smaller, but then if we go into the view of the camera, it doesn't matter that it's getting smaller, because it still looks the same size in the camera view. And I'll finally explain why. To our camera, the angle between this point and this point will stay the same whether it's this size or this size or this size, because cameras only really care about the angle rather than the distance and the size of the object. Okay, but then if we have a camera that's really far away, then that's really far away from the object and it won't be in the lighting anymore. But then if it's really close, then it goes back inside of the object. So how do we keep this a specific distance towards the camera rather than just a 0 to 1 scale? Okay, so let's rephrase the question. How do we get the distance it's travelled to be a known distance in the direction that we want? Well, with any vector, we can normalise it. What this does is it makes it a length of 1, or 1 metre. So no matter what distance the camera is away, it will always travel a length of 1 metre now. But what if we don't want it to be a 1 metre thing, because now it's still inside the cube? Well, we can then scale it to be a certain distance away. Now that might look a bit stretched, and actually yeah, the UVs still look a bit stretched. So let's move the camera back a bit, and then it looks a bit more flattened out. There we go. So now it will always be, let's say, 5 meters away from the middle. And I have just realized this won't actually be 5 meters because I've scaled the cube down. So it's actually 2.5 meters because that's set at half the scale. So that's why the numbers looked a bit weird. But now, no matter how far away the camera is, it will always stay the same distance. Perfect. Now if you remember my animation, you may have seen this sparkle on the coin. Well, how did I do that? I didn't do it manually, obviously. I would never do anything manually. I put a lot of work into making the computer do it all for me. So take a guess how I did this. Well, you'd be right to think that I did what we did before, by scaling it towards the camera so it's always in front of the coin. Well done. But then while I'm here, I might as well explain how I got the sparkle to always be at the far edge, at the farthest point. Okay, here we go. This looks a tad bit more complicated, but I'll go into it. Here, we're selecting for points that are facing away from the view of the camera. Now I've got two methods of doing this, and I can switch between them here. I think the reason I've done this is because this one's more accurate, but because it's doing a ray cast, it maybe costs a bit more and slows down the scene. I don't know, I did this like 9 months ago. But they both essentially do the same thing. This one checks if the direction of the face, or the normal direction, is in the same direction as the vector towards the view of the camera. And then this one is actually firing a ray. from the geometry to the camera and seeing if it actually gets there without intersecting with itself. Now this set position is actually quite important, because if we didn't do this, then they will always start off intersecting at 0 meters. So we need to offset the geometry a tad bit so that the rays don't intersect themselves immediately. Alright, so we know that we want the sparkle on one of these points that are facing towards the camera. Okay, but ideally I want the sparkle to be at the furthest point away from the camera. So we can check the distance of each point to the camera. This just gives you a bit more control if you only want certain groups of vertices to have the sparkle on. So we multiply the distance by our selected vertices, and then we find, out of all the vertices in this coin, which distance is the maximum, okay? And then we can use that to ask, oh well, which of these points actually has said value, by detecting if the distance to the camera is equal to it. So now we only have one point selected. Perfect. We can then instance a sparkle object, which I've just got on its own here, only on the vertex that we've just selected. The scale here is useful if you want to just change how big it is. That's pretty self-explanatory. Now for the rotation, let's follow this along. First off, we're making the sparkle look at the camera. So no matter where I am, the sparkle will always face in the direction of the camera. And we do that by finding the vector of the sparkle to the camera and then aligning the rotation to that. And then we can do some funky stuff to make it spin procedurally and randomly without me having to animate that. If you want to copy this, feel free, but I've currently got it turned off. That's why you haven't seen anything. Cool, so now we have the sparkle on the vertex, we now need to scale it towards the camera to make it in front of the coin. And you'll see that this is done slightly differently to how we did it before. This is just because it's such simple maths that you can do it so many different ways. But it doesn't really matter. We're just scaling the instance rather than using a set position node. So if we have an in front distance of, let's say, 1 meter, we're then multiplying that by the inverse of the distance to the camera, which then counteracts the fact that we're scaling here. Now it's at a distance rather than a scale. And then we add 1, there we go, and join it back to the original coin. Perfect. There you go. This is an incredibly versatile tool that I've used in multiple animations, so I'm glad I get to share it with you guys. Thank you very much for watching. See ya!